There is a kind of exhaustion that sleep can't fix. It's the kind that comes from constantly trying to be enough. Enough for whom? Enough for what? You run, you try, you adapt. And still something inside you keeps wondering, am I finally good enough now? But the answer always seems to slip through your fingers, like sand falling away, no matter how tightly you try to hold it. Maybe it's because you're trying to be amazing for someone who never valued you. And the most unsettling part, that person might not even be around anymore. Or maybe they've been living inside you for much longer than you realise. Carl Jung once said that what we do not face in our unconscious will appear in our lives as fate. But what if that fate is the endless search for personal worth in places where recognition never existed? What if we're unknowingly repeating a desperate attempt to earn the approval that was denied to us in childhood? There's something about this that almost no one notices, and the answer you're looking for might not be where you think it is. Let's walk through this fog together, but gently, because certain truths only reveal themselves when we are ready to feel them. There's a quiet urgency that lives in the chest of someone who has spent a lifetime trying to be noticed. It doesn't scream, but it burns slowly. It's the longing to be recognised not just for what you do, but for who you are. Only that acceptance never comes in the way we expect. So you shape yourself, you transform, you force yourself to shine for those who never saw your light. And this silent effort slowly corrodes the soul, until all that's left is the question we never dare to speak. Is it now that I finally become someone? This unconscious need to prove your worth is like an ancestral echo. It's not just about a demanding boss or an unbalanced relationship. It's about a child who learned far too early that love had to be earned. That affection, recognition, and safety had to be deserved. The devaluation experience back then becomes a distorted lens. And we begin to see the world as a courtroom, where every gesture must be judged, every action applauded, every failure condemned. The cruelest part is that this search has no end. Because those who constantly try to prove their worth, deep down, don't believe they have any. It's like chasing a mirage. You exhaust yourself, but you never arrive. And in the process, you lose yourself. You stop being who you truly are to become what you think the other person wants you to be. But the other almost always remains indifferent, because those who never valued you will not recognize your greatness, not even when it's undeniable. Think about this. How many times have you silenced yourself to please? How many times have you erased yourself just to be accepted? Each of these small emotional deaths builds the illusion that one day you'll finally be enough. But you won't, because it was never about you. It's about the gaze of someone who never knew how to see you. And trying to be amazing before blind eyes is like dancing in the dark, waiting for applause from an empty audience. And it's at this point that the most deceptive illusion is born. The belief that if you do more, give more, stay quiet more, you will finally be chosen. But what few people realise is that this hope is not rational, it's emotional. And emotionally, you are still trying to convince that figure from the past, a father, mother, teacher, someone who left a deep mark, that you are worth it, even if today you are not aware of it. Childhood doesn't leave us, it just changes form. And if we don't recognise the echoes it left behind, we spend our lives repeating failed attempts to be loved. Not for who we are, but for what we represent. And in that, there is immense loneliness. Because even surrounded by people, what you're really seeking is recognition of an old absence, a hole that time cannot fill, and that success, applause, and relationships cannot fill either. Imagine unconsciously carrying the mission of proving your existence, of justifying your presence, as if breathing were not enough, as if simply being here required external permission. This is the most sophisticated prison of the psyche, living as if you're always on stage, being evaluated, measured, judged, and with every new act hoping that someone will finally stand up and say, "Now, yes, you are good enough." But there is one detail that changes everything. This search for approval doesn't happen out of vanity or pride. It comes from a deep lack of self-worth, from an identity conditioned to see itself through the eyes of others. And as long as the mirror is the other, you'll always be a hostage to the distorted image they reflect of you. What few understand is that this need doesn't have to last forever, that the cycle can be broken. But for that, courage is required. The courage to look back, to recognize where the wound began, and to accept that it will never be healed by applause, only by presence. And only when you stop trying to be incredible for those who never valued you, will you begin to remember who you truly are. That brings us to something even deeper. Because when we live for external validation, we enter a self-perpetuating cycle, and it's within this cycle that the true emotional prison lies. The greatest tragedy of childhood is not what happens to us, but what we fail to receive. Carl Jung. It's subtle, almost imperceptible. It begins with a denied compliment, withheld affection, an absent presence. And without realizing it, we build an internal system that starts operating with one single mission: to earn what should have been given freely. Love, approval, validation. But now, instead of receiving, we have to deserve. And this deserving turns into performance, a constant dance between who we are and who the other wants us to be. At first it seems simple. A little effort here, a forced smile there, a strategic silence when your heart wants to scream. But over time, this becomes the norm. The effort becomes identity. And the search for approval becomes the lens through which we interpret all relationships. Every interaction becomes a test. Every look, a judgment. Every absence of response, a silent condemnation. You become a specialist in reading nuances, in predicting expectations, in adjusting your tone, your behaviour, your words. And all of this happens without you even noticing. Because what's at stake is not just acceptance, it's the confirmation of your existence, of your self-worth. It's as if with each new bit of external validation, you get to breathe for one more day. But that breath is never full because it depends on the other. And the other changes, fails, disappears. Within this cycle, even praise becomes an addiction, a small dose of recognition that temporarily soothes the pain of feeling unworthy, but it fades quickly, and the withdrawal returns. And with it, the need to perform even more, better, more charming, more productive, funnier, more understanding, more everything. Until you forget what it was like to simply be. The cruelest part of this cycle is that it seems to work. You even receive love, recognition, applause. But they never reach the core of the wound, because they're not for you. They're for the mask, for the character you built to please. And the emptiness grows, because even surrounded by affection, you still feel alone, disconnected, invisible within your own skin. But there is one detail that changes everything. The cycle of approval is fueled by an invisible belief that your worth depends on someone else's gaze. And that belief wasn't chosen, it was installed. Back in childhood, when your emotional system was still learning what it meant to be loved, respected, and seen. It's at this point that the cycle intensifies, because you start recreating in your current relationships the same emotional pattern from the past. If back then love meant effort, then that's the kind of love you seek today. Love that demands, that tests, that charges a price. And once again you submit, thinking that if you do everything right, Maybe this time it will work, but it doesn't. Because the wound isn't in the present, it's at the origin. What few understand is that breaking this cycle isn't easy. It's painful. It's like leaving an old house you've always lived in, even knowing it's collapsing. It's recognizing that the model of love you learned isn't love, and that true approval will never come from the outside. It begins when you allow yourself to disappoint, when you choose yourself, even if it costs you the applause of those who taught you to depend on it. That brings us to something even deeper. Because before you break the cycle, you need to understand where it began. And almost always, it was born in the silence of a childhood where being seen was a rare privilege. Nothing has a more decisive impact on the human psyche than the childhood experiences we did not live. Carl Jung. There are memories that don't appear as images but as sensations. A tightness in the chest, a lump in the throat, a nameless restlessness. And many of these sensations have a common origin: childhood. It's there when we're still forming our perception of the world and of ourselves, that we are marked by the looks that never came, by the words left unsaid, by gestures that never happened. And what remains, even if we don't remember, is absence. Childhood devaluation doesn't need to be explicit. It seeps in between the lines. When your feelings were dismissed, when your achievements went unnoticed, when your pain was ignored or ridiculed. Small emotional cracks that, over time, become chasms within the soul. And worse, we grow up thinking this is normal. That love hurts. That being seen is a privilege. That self-worth must be earned, never assumed. It's as if, at a very young age, we learned a silent lesson. You will only be loved if you are useful, perfect, obedient. And so we spend our lives trying to meet those invisible conditions no one else imposes anymore. But that still operate within us, like emotional programming that's never been updated. An old script, still running, and deeply limiting. Imagine a child reaching out to show their drawing to their parents and receiving in return a later, or worse, a distracted glance. To that child, it wasn't just any moment. It was the formation of a belief. What I am and what I create doesn't matter. And that belief, even without words, takes root, and it grows stronger, and it will follow them for life. Until one day that child becomes an adult who keeps trying to be amazing for those who never valued them. But there is one detail that changes everything. When we are devalued in childhood, we don't learn to doubt those who hurt us. We learn to doubt ourselves. And it's this doubt, this internal hole, that makes us seek from others a validation that will never be enough. Because what we truly want is to go back in time, to be children again, but this time, to be seen. What few realise is that this childhood pain is still alive, and it manifests in our adult relationships in subtle but devastating ways. We become emotionally dependent, overly empathetic, always eager to please. And every rejection, every criticism, every act of indifference reactivates that old wound. As if to say, see, you really aren't enough. And we go silent. We accept, we repeat. Because the unconscious doesn't distinguish past from present. It only reacts. Healing then doesn't come from the outside. It comes from a reunion with the child we once were, and still are. A child who didn't need to be perfect, just needed to be loved, heard, validated. A child who still lives within us, waiting for someone, finally, to say, I see you. That leads us to something even deeper. Because there comes a moment when this inner child, tired of fighting, begins to long for something else. It longs for the end of the need to be noticed at all costs. We are not what happened to us. We are what we choose to become. Carl Jung. There comes a moment when the exhaustion is no longer physical. It's existential. It comes from constantly trying to occupy spaces that never belong to you. From screaming in silence, hoping someone will finally hear you. From building emotional castles on ground that always pushed you away. And then, almost without realizing it, something inside you breaks. But it's not a destructive break. It's the necessary collapse. The end of the fight to be seen. You begin to realize that spending your life trying to prove your worth is like chasing your own reflection. No matter how close you get, it always slips away. And that chase comes at a high cost. Your peace, your identity, your time. Little by little, you begin to understand that this fight was never truly yours. It was inherited, it was learned. It was imposed, but it is not natural. What's natural would be simply to be, and being in itself should have always been enough. What few people understand is that stopping the fight for approval doesn't mean giving up. It means breaking free, letting go of the constant obligation to adapt, to shape yourself, hold back, hide. It's the beginning of a new relationship with yourself, a relationship where you no longer need to be extraordinary all the time, where the simple fact of existing is already a miracle worthy of respect and reverence. But there is one detail that changes everything. This end of the fight doesn't come explosively. It's quiet, almost imperceptible. It's when you start responding less, explaining less, justifying less. It's when you stop begging for affection and begin to notice who truly loves you, even in silence. It's when the noise of the world makes space for your inner voice. At that moment, something subtle happens. You begin to recognize yourself in your own gestures, in your choices, in your rhythm, and you realize that for years you've been living as a character, one who knew how to please, to charm, to win people over, but who also erased herself, silenced herself, forgot herself. Now the character fades away, and in her place someone more real emerges, more imperfect perhaps, but infinitely more whole. The end of the fight is also the beginning of presence. You no longer need to prove anything, not to others, not to the wounded child within you. She already understands. She has heard what she needed to hear. She has been embraced. And when that child finally rests, you reconnect with a strength that was always there, just waiting for a chance to rise. That leads us to something even deeper. Because when the fight ceases, what is born is something radical. A love that no longer depends on the other. A love that originates within and sustains itself from within. The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. Carl Jung. There is a kind of silence that is not absence. It is presence. A presence that settles in when you realize you no longer need applause nor confirmation. A silence that doesn't hurt, that embraces. Because finally, you've understood. The deepest love doesn't come from outside. It is born the moment you choose to see yourself without the mirror of the other. When you stop begging for affection and begin to build your own sense of belonging. This love isn't romantic. It isn't grand in the external sense. It is quiet. But it has deep roots. It grows in small daily choices, saying no without guilt, being silent without anxiety, choosing your own well-being without carrying the weight of shame. This love is born when you understand that personal worth can no longer be negotiated, that it is a point of origin, not a destination to be reached. You begin to notice it in the subtleties, in relationships that transform because you no longer accept less than you deserve, in conversations that used to distress you but now no longer affect you, in bonds where you once begged for attention. And now you simply observe, not with coldness, but with maturity. Because the love that is born within doesn't need to prove anything. It simply is. But there is one detail that changes everything. This kind of love is not lonely. It is free. And because it is free, it only connects with what is also free. It doesn't bind, doesn't condition, doesn't demand performances. It doesn't wait to be saved, nor does it offer itself as saviour. It walks beside you, but never drags itself. It gives, but never abandons itself. This love comes from reconstruction, from the choice to look inward and heal what was once denied. It sprouts where there were once wounds left by devaluation. Where there used to be gaps of approval, now there is presence. And that presence becomes both shield and bridge. A shield against toxic bonds, a bridge toward truer connections. It's no longer about who chooses you. It's about who you choose to keep by your side. Because now you no longer need relationships that save you. You need relationships that walk with you. And that changes everything. Because you don't cling to others out of fear of loneliness. You share out of a desire to overflow. What few understand is that this love is not the end of a journey, it's the beginning of another. A journey where you no longer depend on someone else to feel whole, where the past no longer guides your decisions, where the wounded child finally plays in peace. Because now she knows she no longer needs to scream to be heard. And then, everything makes sense. In the end, the answer was always there, not in the eyes of those who never valued you, but in the reunion with what was always yours, yourself. There is a moment when everything goes quiet, not because the world stopped, but because for the first time you stopped chasing something that was always ahead of you, but never within. And in that silence, a truth is revealed. You spent your life trying to be amazing for someone who never even knew how to see. For someone who only saw distorted reflections of your light and projected their own darkness onto you. You sought approval like someone gasping for oxygen, unaware that you'd been breathing all along. You waited for recognition like someone waiting for a miracle, but ignored the fact that surviving until now was already the miracle. And this revelation doesn't come with fireworks, it comes with a weight lifting off your shoulders. The realization that there's no need to fight anymore, because the battle was never truly against others. It was always against the emptiness inside. And then, everything makes sense. You realize that self-worth isn't found in the applause that follows the performance, but in the silence you hold when you decide to stop performing. You realize that no one can give you what you already possess. That childhood left marks, yes, but not definitions. And that although being devalued hurt, it's not the end of your story. But are we ready to accept that? Because accepting this truth requires a new posture toward life. It requires letting go of the illusion that someone else will still come and save us. It requires embracing the wounded child and saying, "Now I take care of you." And in that surrender, a peace is born. A peace that doesn't depend on circumstances or people. A peace that simply is. If you've made it this far, maybe you already know. The fight to be incredible for those who never valued you is over. And in the place of exhaustion, something rare and profound is born. Freedom. The freedom to be who you are. Without masks, without performance, without depending on stages that were never yours. The freedom to understand that your self-worth is not measured by the recognition you receive, but by the peace you feel when you no longer need it. In this video, you've walked through the labyrinths of childhood, confronted the invisible cycles of approval, and looked at your wounds with maturity. You've recognized that behind the desire to be seen, there was an untold story, one that now finds words, understanding, and compassion. And the most powerful part, you realised you no longer need to wait for someone to come and value you, because now that validation is born from within, and it is more solid than any external applause. Now is the time to take the first step. Start applying these insights today, and then let me know in the comments how the experience was for you. What was the moment in this video that touched you the most? Which phrase kept echoing inside you? Your sharing might be exactly what someone else needs to read in order to awaken. And if you want to go even deeper into this journey of self-discovery, I'll leave another video here at the top. It might bring a lot of value to your path. See you there.